Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. So in this lecture, inshallah, we will be tackling three different topics relevant to Hadith application. Again, our goal in this module is to look at different things that we have to think about as we try to apply a Hadith. It is not as simple as, well, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said it, so now we just need to do it. We are trying to develop an understanding that things are much more complicated, more subtle, and more nuanced than that. So, let us begin with the topic of eliciting all hadiths relevant to a particular subject or topic. So, as we do all of this analysis in how to apply a hadith, a critical factor is not to look at the hadith that we are interested in isolation from other hadiths. Not just to quote one hadith which we may have heard or read, or which supports the point of view we like. In the personal example that opened this module, we provided a pretty clear instance of a less than thorough reference to the corpus of the Sunnah regarding the topic of the proper length of Fajr prayer. So when an issue is encountered and hadith is used to support an opinion or obtain a ruling, it's necessary to refer to the entire set of hadiths on the issue and attempt a process of compromise or arbitration between them. It's not good practice to just cite the hadith that supports the point of view that the speaker wishes to advance. So, for example, does touching one's private parts invalidate the wudu? One may say clearly, yes it does, because it is reported that Busra bint Safwan narrated that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Whoever touches his sexual organ cannot pray until he performs wudu." That would seem to pretty much settle the matter, right? However, there's also a hadith, according to Talq ibn Ali, where he reported that the Prophet was asked about whether touching the private parts invalidated wudu, and he replied, "Is it not but a piece of flesh or a part of you?" indicating that there was no need to renew the wudu. Now this hadith appears in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, among other sources, and has been judged to be sahih by several scholars. Therefore, it turns out that there are different schools of thought on the issue. Many scholars base their opinion on the first hadith and similar narrations, and say that touching the private parts with the bare hand nullifies wudu, while other scholars, most prominently from the Hanafi school of thought, base their opinion on the second hadith and say it does not nullify the wudu. You see then that it becomes quite important to give a complete picture of an issue and not just cite the hadith that you may like or I may like that supports our opinion. Okay, so after this last example, you may now be confused, thinking, well, does touching the private parts invalidate the wudu or not? There has to be one right answer. Unfortunately, this is often the picture of Islam that we are taught, that there's one clear set of rules or a recipe, and that the test of this life is to see who follows those rules the best. On the large issues, we would agree with that, worshipping one God, prayers, and so forth. However, we also need to realize that this is an incomplete picture, which doesn't take into account things like intent, and does not take into account a genuine flexibility in the Sunnah. In other words, according to the Sunnah itself, there is sometimes more than one right answer. So there are several instances in the Sunnah of the Prophet that strongly suggest that there's some flexibility in the approach which the Prophet, peace be upon him, took in the interpretation and promulgation of religious law, always with a focus on the intent and the spirit of the action rather than on the letter of the law, so to speak. So let's look at a couple of examples. One of them is up here on the slide. It's recorded by Al-Bukhari that the Prophet sent a delegation to the tribe of the Bani Qurayza, and he instructed them no one shall perform the Asr prayer except in Bani Qurayza. Now, as the sun neared setting while the delegation traveled, a difference of opinion arose among them. Some took the Prophet's instruction literally, that they shouldn't pray Asr until they reached Bani Qurayza, even if this was to be after sunset. And so, they did not pray. They waited till they got to Bani Qurayza, and they prayed the Asr after its time, after the sun had set. Others in the group, meanwhile, understood the Prophet's instruction to mean that they should travel quickly to make sure that they reached Bani Qurayza before sunset, and then they should pray Asr there. In their minds, they thought that surely the Prophet didn't mean that Asr should be prayed after sunset. So they tried to travel quickly, but when it became evident that they wouldn't reach Bani Qurayza before sunset, they stopped and they prayed Asr on time on the road. Then they continued their journey. Later, when the Prophet learned of this matter, he didn't criticize either group. Both were right. Now, this example is often used to show the flexibility of the Sunnah. But there's something seldom mentioned when this example is discussed that is probably even more important than the point we just made. Not only did the Prophet not criticize either action as wrong, but most importantly, he didn't say what he originally had intended. While both actions may have been acceptable based on intent, surely the Prophet, when he gave instruction, meant one thing or the other. And the most important lesson in this incident, I think, and God knows best, is that the Prophet never specified what he actually meant. He never said something like, I meant this, but both of you are correct. We believe that this omission on his part was deliberate to show that there may truly be more than one right, and God knows best. Another incident is about two companions who went on a journey. When they failed to find water for wudu, they performed their prayers after doing tayammum. You know tayammum, when water is not available, wiping the hands and face with pure sand or dust. Later, when they found water, one of them then performed his wudu and repeated the prayers, while the other didn't. Upon their return from the journey, they related the incident to the Prophet, who is reported to have approved both courses of action. This again shows the notion that there is flexibility and that there may be more than one right course. By the way, this is an example of what is known as Sunnah Taqririyya. Sunnah Taqririyya is a Sunnah of the Prophet not because he did something or he said something, but because he approved or concurred with an action. Now, a critical and again never discussed lesson in this hadith is the hypothetical that could be posed. What if only one of the men had been on the journey? He would presumably have returned and reported his action to the Prophet. So, for example, let's assume that it was the man who repeated the prayer again when water became available. And he would have come back and told the Prophet and obtained the Prophet's approval. From that time on, it would have been reported that the religious rule is that when a prayer is done with tayammum, it should be repeated with wudu if water becomes available. This obviously would be a distortion of the Prophet's sunnah and of the tremendous flexibility that he displayed. So, another factor to consider then when we think about applying hadiths, other than the things we've discussed, make sure we don't use weak hadiths, think about the content and the matn and applying reason to the hadith, elicit all of the relevant hadiths on the topic, is that there may be genuine flexibility in the sunnah, particularly based on intent. And we will tackle this topic more fully later. Okay, now let's move to our third subtopic of this lecture, and that is the relationship between Quran and Hadith. Now, a significant branch of inquiry about the proper understanding and application of Hadith concerns just this relationship between Quran and Hadith. Remember, we can't just take a Hadith and apply it in a vacuum. So while it's clearly accepted that Hadith is the second source of Islamic law, or Sharia, there's significant debate among the scholars about such issues as can a Hadith quote, abrogate a verse from the Quran? i.e., can it change or nullify a rule stipulated in the Quran? The details of this debate are mostly beyond our scope, but we think that much of the debate actually revolves around the meaning being given to the term abrogation, in Arabic that's known as naskh, in these discussions. And so we wanted to familiarize you that the debate exists and give the scholarly point of view with which we agree, and try to give some clarifications and some examples. Now, we believe that there should be a clear distinction and priority between Quran and Hadith. This is due to multiple factors. Among them are the following, which are taken from Professor Kamali's book, Principles of Islamic Jurisprudence. In your syllabus, you'll find them divided out as direct quotes, because again, this issue is so important. But basically, point number one, showing the priority of the Quran over Hadith, is that the Quran consists of wholly manifest revelation, what is known as wahy zahir, whereas the Sunnah consists mainly of internal revelation, or wahy batin. It is an inspiration to the Prophet. It is a different sort of revelation than the explicit coming of the angel Jibreel with verses of the Quran, as the revelation of the Quran is. This, of course, presumes that the Sunnah relating to religious law represents also a form of revelation to the Prophet, rather than his own rightly guided opinion. Now, point number two is that the authenticity of the Quran is not open to doubt. In other words, as the scholars say, it is qat'i, or decisive, in respect of its authenticity, and must therefore take priority over the Sunnah. Remember, I'm now quoting from Professor Kamali, or at least that part of the Sunnah that is speculative, or dhanni in Arabic, in respect to authenticity, end quote. You'll soon see that this notion of definitiveness of authenticity will relate to our upcoming discussion of mutawatir and ahad hadiths, and whether they are sufficient to engender what the scholars call yaqeen, or certainty about a matter, or do they only engender dhann, or conjecture or probability about a matter. Okay, point number three is that the entire text of the Quran has come down to us through continuous testimony, in other words, tawatur. The Quran, each and every one of its verses is mutawatir, whereas the Sunnah has for the most part been narrated and transmitted in the form of solitary or ahad reports. Only a small portion of the Sunnah has been transmitted in the form of mutawatir. Point number four, the Quran, in none of its parts, so no part of the Quran is conceptual transmission. That is, transmission in the words of the narrator himself. Now, we touched a little bit on this point in Module 1, but both the concepts and the words of the Quran have been recorded and transmitted as the Prophet received them. The Sunnah, on the other hand, consists, in the most part, of the transmission of concepts in words and sentences that belong to the narrators. That is why one finds that different versions of one and the same hadith are reported by people either whose understanding of a particular hadith were not identical, as Professor Kamali said, or maybe their memory of the precise wording is not identical. Now, this point is extremely underappreciated among Muslims, who all treat hadiths as direct, verbatim quotes of the Prophet. The Quran, we believe, is the direct, verbatim word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Sunnah, on the other hand, is often not the direct word of the Prophet, but rather a paraphrasing of the meaning he conveyed, undertaken by the narrator of the hadith, very similar to when we quote a hadith in English. The number of mutawatir hadiths transmitted verbatim in the words of the Prophet is actually extremely small. We had an example of that in Module 1, the hadith that was narrated by over 70 companions, that whoever attributes something to me falsely on an intentional basis, let him await his seat in hellfire. Now finally, point number 5 in establishing an order of priority between the Quran and the Sunnah is that the latter is explanatory of the former, and explanation or commentary should naturally occupy a secondary place in relationship to the source. And this point gets to the heart of an extensive debate as to whether the Sunnah in fact constitutes an entirely independent source of law, or whether it is wholly an extension of the Quran. And this issue has been discussed in some length by the classical scholars, and Imam al-Shafi'i sums up the debate as follows, quote, "I don't know anyone among the ulama to oppose the doctrine that the Sunnah of the Prophet is of 3 types. First is the Sunnah which prescribes the like of what God has revealed in His book. Next is the Sunnah which explains the general principles of the Quran and clarifies the will of God. And last is the Sunnah where the Messenger of God has ruled on matters on which nothing can be found in the Book of God. The first 2 varieties are integral to the Quran, but the ulama have differed as to the third." And what Imam al-Shafi'i here means is the ulama have differed as to whether the Sunnah is meant to be an example, an explanation, a clarification of the Quran, or whether it is also meant to be a totally independent source of Islamic law. And this quote of Imam al-Shafi'i is from his famous epistle or al-Risala, and it's quoted by Sheikh Muhammad Abu Zahra in his book Usul al-Fiqh, the Principles of Islamic Jurisprudence. Now, we subscribe to the majority view of the ulama that the Sunnah as a whole should be viewed as integral to the Quran rather than as an independent source. And this is summed up by Professor Kamali as follows, quote, "According to the majority of ulama, however, the Sunnah in all its parts, even when it enacts original legislation, is explanatory and integral to the Quran." So we subscribe to the majority view of the ulama that the Sunnah as a whole must be viewed as integral to the Quran rather than as an independent source. This is summed up by Professor Kamali as follows, quote, "According to the majority of ulama, however, the Sunnah in all its parts, even when it enacts original legislation, is explanatory and integral to the Quran." This is not a unanimous point of view. There are some who feel that the Sunnah functions as a totally separate source from the Quran. But really this gets back to the point we made about the meaning of the word abrogation and probably about the meaning of independent. The Sunnah may, of course, give rules that are not present in the Quran. For example, the timing of the prayers, the number of rak'ahs in the prayers. But they fall under the umbrella of explanation of the Quranic rule of prayer being a timely obligation on the believers. Let's look at a specific example here to show what we mean about the Sunnah being integral to the Quran. And in that integrality, it can clarify or specify Quranic rules. So if we look at this portion of verse 6 from Surah Al-Ma'idah, this is the wudu verse, and it stipulates that whenever the believers go to pray, they must do wudu, including washing their feet. So if we read the verse, we see that it says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. And then the verse continues for other exceptional circumstances, but we'll just take a look at this part. O you who believe, when you rise to perform prayer, wash your faces and your forearms to the elbows, and wipe over your heads and wash your feet to the ankles. And so the Quran is telling us that when we get up to pray, we do wudu, including washing our feet. But we have on the authority of multiple hadiths, considered mutawatir by some scholars, that the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to sometimes wipe over the khuf. The khuf is a sock-like leather covering over the feet. Instead of washing his feet, if he had already done his wudu before he had put them on, and then he breaks his wudu with them on, so when he comes back to do his wudu, he washes the face, the hands, the arms, and so on, and then wipes over the feet. Now, most scholars also extend this permission to socks, not just the leather khuf, but also to socks. And that is why you might see people often wipe over their socks while doing wudu. You may have seen your father or your mother or a relative or a friend do their wudu, and then instead of taking off the socks and putting their feet in the sink and washing their feet, they wipe over the socks. This is an example of a strong hadith clarifying a Quranic rule. It would seem superficially that the hadith contradicts the Quran, which just says to do wudu, including washing your feet. And that's what we mean about the debate on the role of the relationship between hadith and Quran, often revolving around the meaning of the word naskh or abrogation. We do not believe that this is a naskh or abrogation of a Quranic rule. We believe that this is specifying or clarifying a Quranic rule, and we don't call this abrogation. It's a nice example of the interplay between the hadith and the Quran, where the hadith clarifies the application of a rule in the Quran, making it not obligatory in some circumstances. By the way, not in your syllabus, but I'll just digress a little bit in this lecture, just for a nice grammar point for those who speak Arabic. If you don't, please don't worry about it in the least. It is not essential. But when you read the verse, you notice that it says that يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق. Now, why wujuhakum? Why is it mansub? Why is there a fatha there? And aydiyakum mansub? Because it is maf'ul bihi. It is the object of the verb wash. What are you washing? You're washing your face. You're washing your hands to the elbows. Then it says wamsahu biru'usikum. And you notice that ru'usikum here is majroor. There's a kasra under the sin. Why is it majroor? Because of the harf ba, the harf al-jar. Wamsahu bi ru'usikum. Now you notice when we get to the next word, wa arjulakum, there's a fatha over the lam. Arjulakum is mansub. So we know that that wa is a harf atf. It links the word arjulakum to what has come before, but we know that it is not linked to ru'usikum, which has a rule of wipe over your heads. It says wipe over your heads. Then it says wa arjulakum. Because arjulakum is mansub, we know that that atf is to wujuhakum and aydiyakum, which come under the umbrella of washing. So we wash our faces, we wash our hands, we wipe over our heads, but then when we get to arjulakum, because it is mansub, we know that it is referred back to wujuhakum and aydiyakum, which fall under the rule of washing. That's why we wash the feet, but we wipe over the head. Now, there are variant readings of this verse, very minor in terms of those who subscribe to it, but if we were to read the word as wa arjulikum majroor, then it would be ma'tuf, it would be linked to ru'usikum, and it would fall under the rule of wiping. So if somebody were to read the verse wamsahu bi ru'usikum wa arjulikum ila al-ka'bayn, then the meaning of the verse would be wash your faces, wash your hands to the elbows, wipe your heads, and wipe your feet. And the reason the vast majority of us wash our feet is because the reading in the Quran is wa arjulakum mansub. So I hope some of you at least enjoyed that digression. If you didn't, I hope at least you got some of the meaning of the nuances of the Arabic in the Quran. Okay, so let's look at another example of the interplay between hadith and the Quran. Perhaps you've been on a trip with your family and you've learned that when traveling you can shorten and combine your prayers. Now, where does this rule come from? When we look at the Quran, we see that the subject of shortening the prayers while traveling is discussed. It's verse 101 from Surah An-Nisa. And so let's look at the verse. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإذا ضربتم في الأرض فليس عليكم جناح أن تقصروا من الصلاة إن خفتم أن يفتنكم الذين كفروا إن الكافرين كانوا لكم عدوا مبينا. Now, what is the translation? And when you travel throughout the land, there is no blame upon you for shortening your prayers, if you fear that those who disbelieve may disrupt or attack you. Indeed, the disbelievers are ever to you a clear enemy. Now, you notice that the Sahih International Translation puts here in brackets, especially if you fear. But that is actually not in the Arabic. The Arabic just says that if you are traveling through the land, there is no blame on you. It's okay for you to shorten your prayers if you fear that the unbelievers may attack you. And so, the permission given in the Quran is about shortening our prayers if we're afraid of being attacked by the enemy. That's when we shorten the prayers when we're traveling. Why then do we shorten and combine when we're just on vacation? Here now, again, the permission comes from the Sunnah of the Prophet. It's related in the Hadith books that a man named Ya'la ibn Umayyah asked Umar ibn al-Khattab this exact question. And he says, I said to Umar ibn al-Khattab, explain to me why the people shorten the salah when Allah says, and when you travel, the verse above, meaning that shorten when you're afraid of being attacked, and those days are gone. And Ya'la meant that Islam had now become predominant through the Arabian Peninsula, and Muslims were no longer afraid of being attacked when they traveled, yet they continued to shorten their prayers. Now Umar ibn al-Khattab listened to his reply. He said, I wondered about that too, and I mentioned that to the Prophet, and he said, this is a charity that Allah the Exalted has bestowed upon you, so accept His charity. So here once again we see the interplay between the Hadith and the Quran, where a Sahih Hadith can specify or clarify a ruling in the Quran. In the previous case, the rule of washing the feet in wudu was limited or made not obligatory in some circumstances, and instead we can wipe over the socks. In this case, a license is given in the Quran for shortening the prayers in a very specific circumstance, is extended by the Hadith to other circumstances. So the Quran gives a very, very specific circumstance when we can shorten the prayers when we're traveling, and then the Hadith extends that to other circumstances. Now notice that in both cases, the Hadith makes things easier on the believer and is an extension of God's mercy and grace. And this discussion also represents a nice answer to those who would claim that we can derive all of our religious rules from the Quran and that we don't need the Hadith, and we've discussed this topic earlier, and they serve as a very nice example of how the Hadith complements and clarifies the application of Quranic rules. And so we've now come to the end of a somewhat long lecture, but we have, I think, tackled important topics in the application of Hadith. Thank you, and we will see you next lecture, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.